Welcome to Zen and the Art of Emergency Management, where we embrace the philosophy to treat everything that happens as the best thing that could happen. In emergency management, really? Yes, because when we do, we move beyond wishing for the world that we want and we deal with the world that we have, and then we can move forward in a positive and creative manner. In episode 2, I'm excited to have Brenden Winder here from Christchurch, New Zealand. I'm looking forward to this conversation for several reasons. One of them is when I was at FEMA Region 9 in Oakland, California, I worked with Pacific Islanders a lot, American Samoa, Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, Hawaii, and I find they face a lot of similar challenges. First of all, they're resource constrained. Even an urban area like Honolulu has to import most of its goods and a lot of its services. And they face all the disasters, right? Hurricanes and typhoons, earthquakes and tsunamis, flood, drought, volcanoes, for goodness sakes. They have winter storms, and yes, some of them have snow. And when disaster strikes, it is a challenge. There is no interstate road or rail system to bring all the goods and services that they need in a fast manner. They may only have one runway at an airport that can only handle just a few aircraft. Their port may not be able to handle container ships, so everything has to be offloaded somewhere else and brought to them. So what I've found is Pacific Islanders typically need to be more resilient, both before, during, and after a disaster. Okay, enough about me. Let's hear from Brenden Winder, Emergency Manager and City Council Member from Christchurch, New Zealand.
Kia ora, Randy, from Christchurch, New Zealand. I'm an emergency manager here in New Zealand's second largest city, and we have a track record of having emergencies in the city. If we go back only 15 or so years, there was an earthquake here, pretty significant one, killed 180 odd people and tore the city apart physically, and did some emotional damage too. And I've been involved prior to that. I was an emergency manager in Queenstown, New Zealand, and then worked in Christchurch for a number of years afterwards, general response and recovery. Went back to Queenstown, COVID hit, another emergency, came back to Christchurch, looked after some more of the recovery space here, now back full-time in the emergency management sector, and really enjoying the role, but also really conscious of the changing world that we live in, and the specific risks in New Zealand as well. So it's an interesting and very busy space, and I'm pleased to be talking to people from all over the world about how we operate and hoping to learn from them and maybe share a little bit of what we've learned and make it better for everyone.
Yeah, you betcha. I mean, the earthquake, of course, no notice, absolutely devastating. Was there any major takeaway from that from you, maybe in terms of people's preparedness or the government's response or whatever the case may be, that we may learn from other jurisdictions in a sudden earthquake?
Yeah, maybe if I go kind of micro to macro, and that might be because there's lessons all throughout the entire vertical of a response. At a community level, and I don't mean to call that micro by any means. It's probably certainly the most important level. But at a community level, preparedness, I think, has changed a little bit. In the time that I've been involved in emergency management, preparedness was often about having stuff. Do you have a getaway bag, and do you have a blanket, and do you have your medicines and those sort of things? And that's useful to have stuff. But I think resilience is more than having stuff. It's mostly a mindset. People that are prepared to look after themselves mentally will do much better than people who have all the stuff but don't have the mindset to be resilient.
Sure.
So we're making a shift here away from preparedness being a box of things. So away from a kit set or a tool set to a mindset, and that I think will far better set up our community to respond. Then if we go a shift in levels here and we look at the local arrangements and the local government arrangements, the local government arrangements here got tested during the earthquake and afterwards as well. I think it's important to remember that almost every local government arrangement I've seen nationally and internationally would have really struggled in those big events. The scale, scope, duration, complexity, ambiguity, expense, etc., is overwhelming. And that's not a criticism of anyone that was involved at all. It's just a set of circumstances that coalesced at a particular point, and it made it very difficult to have a highly organised, highly effective response when you're dealing with something which is effectively a black swan. So at the local level, that it was overwhelming, but pretty quickly got boxed up and squared away. And then at the national level, depending on the politics of the day, the response to it is heavily influenced. So at every layer of the response, there can be significant levers pulled to make it better or not make it better. And nationally, at the time, we had a government that was very responsive to this and poured a lot of money into it, which is the primary role of central government is to provide financial support. And they did that. And over time, the 3 or 4 different layers, I guess, of the response have mostly worked together. There's been some tension points, but when everyone has the same belief that it can be better and drive to make it better, we'll talk about the recovery dividend later on. Christchurch got badly hit 2010-11, but if you come to the city now, it's modern, safe, clean, organised, progressive. So, you have the event and it sucks. But if you do a good job of recovering over time, you can come back, you can bounce back better. And now Christchurch is a wonderful place to live.
Yeah, it's funny, in disasters, we exercise a lot. We do preparedness events, at least, and when I say us, here are my experience in the United States with FEMA. And we have exercises, very response focused, and we're doing the stuff. And then recovery, we never seem to get to. But in reality, most of the time, our response is this much, and then our recovery is that much, right? The event happens, and the rest of the time we're just cleaning up. So, like I said, a little more than a decade later, you're back and you're going in beautiful, beautiful city.
So I was just going to say, I work in. I've spent a lot of time working in recovery and also response, and it is my opinion, and only my opinion. But recovery is far harder. Far harder. It goes on for much longer. It can be much more complex. The rule set has reverted back to normal, so you no longer have the extraordinary powers you have during response, but you have even more extraordinary and ambiguous and volatile and complex circumstances to be resolved. And one of the particular challenges of recovery is just relentless. A response can last a few days or a few weeks, or if you're unlucky, a couple of months. But when recovery goes on for 7 or 8 years or longer, that's a real drain on the people and the systems that are involved in it. So, so I say to people who are working in recovery right now, I salute you. It's an unbelievably difficult job to sustain at a high level for a long time. In my opinion, it's far tougher than response.
Yeah, I guess that is one of those things. We don't have the wand, the wish it away. Okay, we're all recovered and we're moving on. And when I do risk assessments and we set objectives for that, it'll be. I'm like, that sounds like 10 years, 5 years minimum for these things. And I remember this happens all the time. I remember when the fires in Maui hit. It was a couple months later. I felt like on the news they were like, "How come they haven't built back? How haven't they recovered?" And I'm like, "Oh my goodness!" At 2 or 3 months, you don't even know yet. You haven't even cleared the debris and all the things, as you know, all the things that go along with that. So, that is really important, right? Kind of the theme of this thing. Yes, you can't wish it away. This is it, and this is our new world. How it exists, and how are we going to get forward? And it is great news, right? A city that's devastated does come out on the other end. And I think, as you said, it's important. That is a mindset kind of issue, right? Either like, I'm leaving, I don't, whatever the case may be, or no, we're here. This is our community. This is our town. We're going to go. So I have a question about the event itself, and I guess it goes to those logistics. And so I did. I was in the movement control unit, so I was coordinating stuff to Guam or CNMI or wherever the case may be. And how is your situation there in terms of bringing supplies in, the capacity of airports, ports to bring stuff from off island?
Yeah, I guess there's sort of two events here which are a useful compare contrast. When the earthquake happened, it was right in Christchurch, and the surrounds of Christchurch there was some impact, but as you got further away, the impact was significantly less. So
Mm-hmm.
Christchurch has an international airport and seaport. It's the major tourism hub for the South Island of New Zealand, but the rest of the country was largely unaffected. So while we had a devastating impact here in Christchurch, the rest of the country pretty easily wrapped around it. When I say pretty easily, that's with massive air quotes, but without too much drama, wrapped around it and enabled the logistics effort to carry on. I think the comparable or the contrasting response was COVID, where New Zealand sits basically at the end of the global food chain and supply chain, and we had a very difficult time then when it became apparent that moving goods, particularly around the world, was far more constrained. So we had for us, COVID was a medical and health event, which turned into a PR event, which turned into a logistics event.
Mm.
And we
Yeah.
learned a whole lot of lessons then. So we've recently, our National Emergency Management Agency has spent a lot of time updating our catastrophic planning handbook. And a significant part of that is looking into what the logistics requirements will be and what we can deal with locally and what we're going to have to outsource and how we might do that. So, um, there's an old military saying, amateurs do combat, but the professionals do logistics.
Yes.
And look, that is it is very real in emergency management. All of what we do stops if we don't have people, fuel, plant, etc. So we need to be good at logistics and good at people.
Absolutely, and then there's that tension of costs and things like how much what size of a cache can I afford right now to have stuff ready to go, and because there's turnover and can I sustain it and how much risk do I take? It's a tough one. Yeah, I remember as a war planner, we were planning and they'd say, "Hey, Air Force, can you do this?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, of course we can." And and the Army and the Marine Corps guys, they had a whole row of logistics planners, right? Every question they were typing on their computer, running through models really quickly before they go yes or no or whatever the case may be. So you're exactly right. It's all about logistics because I think emergency management is quite simply getting the right resources to the right people at the right place at the right time. So it's all about getting things there. So that's great. And um, and something you brought up, of course, is that's you see in a major earthquake is cascading effects. You can't just plan for an earthquake. Oh, an earthquake happened, and we clean up some stuff. There's all those things. Power's out, water's out, transportation's out. Sometimes tsunamis, and I don't recall. No, I don't think you didn't have a tsunami with that event, did you?
No, we didn't. It wasn't tsunamigenic, but we are planning for consecutive events here where we could have a tsunamigenic event near shore, which could be felt as an earthquake and then generate a tsunami as well. So while we didn't get it in the events 15 years ago, we're certainly aware of that possibility.
Yeah. And I don't know, that's one of the major disasters we plan for here in the U.S., the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake and some tsunami. You familiar with that?
Yeah, we are, and we're looking to the planners and leaders who deal with Cascadia to help us understand similar risks in New Zealand. So part of part of this conversation today and more broadly is around having, an international cohort of practitioners that can share learning and experience and training and opportunities and challenges so that we can all benefit together and work together. And that Cascadia fault, I'm not an expert in it, but I certainly know enough about it to think that we need to be talking to your people.
Yeah. Yes, it's the giant devastating, like you say, you get the earthquake, things break, you get the tsunami, they break more, we're isolated. And it's terrible. So mindset, like you said, is everything. I was actually doing a preparedness workshop in Northern California about 9 months ago, and the earthquake hit. And of course, in California, what does everybody do when they feel shaking? They go to the window to see what's outside. I'm like, come on, people, we're right in a workshop. Get under the tables. And then everybody goes to the harbor to see the disaster. And the number one thing I've heard as I've talked to multiple clients that that got goofed up on that was accountability, right? There's tsunamis, inundation zones all along the coast there. And a lot of people left work or they went to go home to check on things. So they left a place that was high and dry if a tsunami didn't happen. And they went to a tsunami zone, and then immediately we were like, where did everybody go? Are they okay? And so happily nothing like that happened, but that was probably the biggest lesson learned, earthquake, as you know, earthquake, run to the hills, wait for it, account for people, and sit tight for a little bit until it's all clear. Yeah.
Earlier, Randy, you said emergency management's getting the right stuff to the right people at the right time, and I think largely I agree with that. But I think there's another part to it. I think emergency management's about three things. One, you just described, getting the right stuff to the right people at the right time. So getting stuff in logistics. The other part is about getting people out of where the hazard is. And the third part is a mixture of both. And if we want to break emergency management down into real fundamentals, it's about getting stuff in, people out, or a mixture. And those three things, if we just focused on stuff in, people out, and a mixture, we would be really well advanced in the emergency management response space. Part of the reason I want to think about and talk about emergency management is because we can, as a sector, overcomplicate it. We can make it, the saying here is bigger than Ben-Hur, the movie, where there's 1,000. It's a big movie with a whole lot of things happening in it. But so if we try and make emergency management bigger than Ben-Hur, it become complicated and ineffective and inefficient. But if we break it down to the absolute fundamentals, stuff in, people out, or a mix, and then we just focus our efforts on that, we can have a very effective response without the additional complications that can slow down and affect the community.
I'm guilty of that. And I have to tell you right now, in the world we're changing in, working with my clients, decreasing funding, all this stuff, I'm trying to absolutely cut my memory off of everything I've learned. Not everything, this way of doing things in FEMA. I'm very wonkish and like, here it is. And I'm my Department of Defense trained planner, and it's all this way. And I'm thinking, you know what? Yeah, it needs to be simpler. Like my whole focus now going forward, with more limited resources, how do we make it simple and break it down? Have you tracked with a trend here called community lifelines?
We have so we have a slightly different name for it here, but I'm certainly aware of the community lifelines concept. Yeah.
So I love it. And everyone I'm working with, everyone's going that way because it's exactly what you said. It's like, okay, we've got all these things. How do we break it down to a very core set of things? So I love your concept. And, working with the state of Nevada, people in, people out, goodness gracious, they face that every summer with the fire season, people coming out of the mountains, evacuating while we're trying to get help in. So they've certainly had some good lessons learned there. So the attitude, the mindset, right, of how we're preparing and we're reacting and we're recovering. One thing I found, again, in the islands, Guam in particular, I worked with them a lot in a youth program, had a very communal, well, I think all the islands I've been to do, very communal type of society, much more aware, much closer, looking after each other. And so I'm wondering, and I actually work with Native American Indian tribes here a lot. So I'm wondering for y'all, how does either traditional or modern culture affect it, or being on an island and isolated affect what's going on?
Yeah, good question. I think there's two elements to that, and they're pretty well linked. A couple of hundred years ago in New Zealand was colonised by Europeans, but Māori, the indigenous folk of New Zealand, of which I consider myself to be a part, but we're running a very successful country themselves before the Europeans turned up. And they had a concept here called Mataranga Māori, which is indigenous knowledge. And it served them very well, and continues to serve Māori very well. And over time, the New Zealand emergency management community and scientific community have thankfully had enough humility to look at Mataranga Māori and say, actually, there's a whole lot of stuff in here, most of it actually pretty bloody useful. So let's not pretend we've got all the good ideas. So So New Zealand is a bicultural country, so Māori and everyone else, and that's not a separation. That's just Māori have a unique legacy role to play in this country, which is acknowledged through our treaty. So our biculturalism or multiculturalism is a strength, and with that Mataranga Māori and some of European and Western science and all of the other communities we have in New Zealand too, because we're a real cosmopolitan melting pot from around the world. That's a real strength. And we use that in our emergency management planning to help us, and we don't use it, we don't consider these communities to be vulnerable, we consider them to be assets. How can we leverage the Somali community to help us out? How can we get benefit from the faith community or the sports community or the Muslim community or all of these other wonderful, rich and diverse groups that live in New Zealand all have a really significant beneficial role to play, and we work hard to incorporate that. It doesn't always work out perfectly, but there's a real genuine desire to do that. Alongside that, we are an island. And, for a very long time here, for thousands of years, Māori were living down here, not isolated. They were still trading with other nations, but it was a much smaller level. But from that isolation, from those constraints comes creativity. So there's a concept in New Zealand called the number 8 wire mentality. A number 8 wire is just a thin piece of wire. It's a gauge of wire that was used for fencing for the last couple of hundred years in New Zealand so we could look after our production animal stock. But what we also figured out was this number 8 wire was really useful for a whole lot of other things. Everything you can think of. So the number 8 wire mentality is about taking some apparently innocuous piece of equipment and turning it to another use. And that has become embedded and ingrained in the whole of New Zealand way of thinking. So we know that we're at the end of the global supply chain. So whatever's here is here. And we can't necessarily rely on other stuff turning up. So we need to be creative. There's also another quite famous saying in New Zealand is we don't have a whole heap of money, so we have to think. And we are a first world country, and we've got, there is plenty of money around. But it isn't overflowing. This isn't a massively affluent country. It's affluent enough. But because we don't have a whole heap of money, we have to think. And New Zealand's got a rich history of explorers and scientists and academics and other people who've turned their brain to some pretty big problems. And because they've had to live with constraints, it really helps them blossom in the creative thinking and abstract thinking piece. And we've got some people in New Zealand that are very clever at that. And when we add up all those benefits, it means that we can respond pretty well when we need to.
I work a lot with rural counties, tribal nations, and the affluent cities might have plenty of resources, although they're still all have their challenges. Big city brings big problems, and so you're right. As it even draws down even more, how does a lone emergency manager in a county, a large county, a large local population get by? And so I love it. Your number one thing is think, be creative, don't just give up. Yeah, that's a solution. Try to come up. Was it number 8 wire? Is that what was that saying?
Number 8 wire, yeah.
Number 8 wire solution. I like that. Right.
Yeah. So here's a recent example I was discussing with one of my staff members yesterday, and we were talking about how do we provide at the national level a really high degree of situational awareness across the country. Mm-hmm. And there was all sorts of technological solutions and other things that were getting, people were trying to sell to us. And this chap who works with me said to me, why don't we just give them the logins so they can see what we're seeing? So there was $1 million solution getting touted over here, and he sent an email, and 10 minutes later, largely the problem was fixed because it was about problem definition and about understanding the real problem. So at a surface level is, national needs to have situational awareness. Well, obviously the solution is technological, so let's go and buy something and introduce technology. But actually that wasn't the problem. The problem was access. And when that problem had been thought through and defined, the solution was free and took about 10 minutes. So that's an example of, if you start by thinking and define the problem, you can make sure you're climbing the right mountain. You should be climbing the right mountain, not climbing the wrong mountain. And it's very easy to fool yourself that you're climbing the right mountain. And we are really conscious of that. So we pause and think. It's a deliberate tactic.
I love that because I'm facing that a lot with folks. Yeah, they got expensive, fancy systems, and now money's gone away. So like, I can't afford the system, and nobody bothered to learn it anyway. How do we share this information with systems we already have? We already paid for it, whether it's Microsoft Teams or like you said, you already have a site, shared folders, a website. Like, oh, what if they just had access, and they could just see what we're working on at all times? That's absolutely beautiful.
The other day too, where we heard from someone saying, we're building capability in this space, and look, we've now got a warehouse, we've got, nappies in there, so what do you call them, diapers, and we've got this medical stuff, and we've got that thing. I was thinking, well, thinking to myself, that's great. Next door is a supermarket. They have the same stuff. So I don't understand why you would have two next to each other and consider yourself prepared, because what you're really doing is taking away in an emergency the agency of the supermarket who's supposed to have that stuff. So you're diminishing your local ability to respond by creating another store here,
right?
That is redundant because you've already got it. So for me, it's that mindset thing again. It's preparedness is not about having stuff; it's about how you think.
I can't agree more. We had I think it was Superstorm Sandy. There were stories like FEMA set up free gas over here, right across the street from a gas station. And I was in the movement control unit. And so it was about moving stuff, against stuff. And I became totally convinced our job in the government needs to be to fix the infrastructure, because the private sector already supplies stuff 24/7, 365 to the whole entire population. And so as long as we can enable them to do that, then they can just continue on, what they're doing, and rather than compete and set up a complete different supply chain, especially on an island. Because I've been there. Like, okay, in Saipan, we need to rent a bunch of trucks, to move stuff around. Like, there's not that many. There's no bunch of trucks that are going to suddenly show up. So, what use is that? So I can't agree with you more about that. All right, again, this whole Zen thing, and one of the principles is embracing uncertainty. And we in the emergency management world, we do that as a general basis for disasters and things. One challenge with embracing uncertainty I had in individual and community preparedness is, let's think about this earthquake. At the time, the U.S. Geological Survey said there's like a 65% chance of a 7.0 earthquake in the next 30 years. All right, I could throw that out, and people went, or there's a 100-year flood. And I found that I learned from a woman named Angela Knack, who just taught me this. He's like, you need to make it real, dude. Whatever the thing is, and it might be a mindset. She goes, in this urban area, this renter's not worried about that earthquake. They're worried that they're stuck on the freeway and their kids crying because they're hungry and whatever. And if we can get them to have some supplies in there, they can feed their kid from their survival kit or whatever the case may be. So whatever that thing was, I think, oh yeah, we need to try to make it, more real. So how do we get people to do that, embrace that uncertainty and prepare for that?
Yeah, really good question. I think there's a couple of things I just want to touch on. Small events have small impacts, medium events have medium to large impacts, and big events have enormous impacts. It's logarithmic. And trying to explain to people what it's like to be in a really big event, and they've only ever been in a small one, is very difficult. They don't have the ability to conceptualize, the pervasiveness of these events. After a large earthquake, every single thing is impacted. Every societal thing, every community thing, every infrastructural thing, every network, every sports thing, every faith thing, everything is impacted. And in a smaller event, they're not. And the difference between the two is compelling. I also think there's a part of what we're talking about here is humans' ability to learn. And what we're trying to get away from here is having the experience and then get the learning. We want to do the learning before we get the experience. And to flip that narrative on the head is very important where you can. Alongside that is the understanding is stories stick and data doesn't. If you go out to the community and give them a whole lot of, the 1 in 200 year event return period and the data such and such and the 9.0 and the modified Mercalli scale in the area of such and such square miles. People are just like, what are you talking about, man? But if you can go into that community and tell them a story they can connect with, and what
Mm.
we've tried to do here is we've created a persona. So we call this lady Maya. She doesn't exist, but she's a young lady. She's just connected from her family geographically, but not in reality. She has a job, she has friends, she has hobbies, she has a pet, and we want to tell the story about Maya because people can relate to those stories, and the stories will
Yes.
stick. And how do we teach kids um, fairy tales that they remember for the rest of their life? They're stories. We don't, we try and bash the data into them at school so they can remember how to do maths. But if you can tell them a story, they remember it. So if we have people we understand and stories that we can connect with, we'll have a lifetime understanding of what we need to be doing. So the story piece, even in a sector as scientific and disciplined and organised as emergency management, we need to have a creative side and a connection element in there that really gets into people's consciousness, and the way in is not via data, it's via stories.
Talk story. Oh my goodness. That's a big light bulb over my head right now going, that is brilliant. I love that because that's the number one thing is making it real.
Yeah, I think this is the opportunity, right? So we talk, here we are almost on opposite sides of the planet, and both of us have got light bulbs going off around learning and opportunities to be better and change. And excuse me, when we leverage the international community to do that, which is so much easier to do now with technology, I think we all benefit from it. So, hey, if you take the story concept that we've talked about here and run with it, like please do. That we want people to go and test it and use it, and you'll think of something very clever, and 6 months time come back and tell me, and we'll benefit from it. So it becomes a virtuous cycle.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I've been trying different things. Recently, I ran a workshop. I used the little workshop. I'm taking lots of notes. I did one recently and I said, we're going plain English. So, I saw a show where this guy thinks in colors, like he hears something and he sees colors and things like that. I think in FEMA core capabilities, when people say something, I go, oh, that's this core capability and that's that one. So I ran a workshop recently. I go, I'm going to try to throw all of that gobbledygook out. Let's talk plain English. And I go, like getting stuff where it's needed and helping people, whatever the case may be. And I just recorded the whole session actually in this format and just chatted the whole time. And we just talked. And I would throw in keywords. In the end, I was able to use AI afterward to break all that information out. So it made for a more effective, workshop because we're talking, because that's what we really want to get to is talking. So, but yes, you just changed my whole thing of how I'm doing my very next workshop as I go forward is the personas and breaking it down into story. That's brilliant. Learned so much today. The resiliency you have. I love the number 8 wire. I got to throw that in somewhere. That's going in. I love talking story everywhere I go. So it's gonna be the number 8 wire, and forget about the stuff. Think, and then make it real for people through personas. I've learned a great deal from you today. Any final thoughts, comments, questions?
Yeah, couple of things. One, we've two things. Keeping community at the center of our thinking, and two, leveraging technology. So maybe if I start with the community piece because it's the most important. Occasionally you'll hear in events, the response will be judged on the media um,
Mm.
feedback, and I think that's partially true. I think the legacy of an emergency response is actually measured by the community. So the media cycle will go through, and whoever they are at the time can have an impact there. But if I'm looking at about how well an event went, I don't necessarily go to the media for my definition of feedback. I will wait and see how the community sentiment is, and that will help me understand if we've done a good job with the response. So I'm particular about that. I think that is a far better indicator of the value add of a response is to measure through the community rather than through the media. To change tack a little bit there, one of the other things we have to do in New Zealand is because we have some pretty significant hazards here, and not a small amount of people, but only a small number of people working in the sector. We have to leverage technology, and that comes with risks. I get that, but also there's some benefits too. So there's a whole lot of generative AI out there, and I know there's a lot of emergency managers that are skeptical about using it, but we've taken the view that it's a tool, and we want to get it out of the toolbox and see where it can be applied. So we've created a number of custom GPT apps where we can, we load it up in advance with the information that we know that we're going to use. So, for example, we can have a whole lot of our tsunami planning information sitting in there, plans and documentation and bits and pieces, and the legislation and directors' guidelines and after action reviews, and all the information that every emergency manager needs to sort of synthesize in their head, all hundreds and hundreds of documents, which, let's be honest, none of us can do it. But we have it sitting there, and then if we have a real event, and a daytime evacuation and a nighttime evacuation are basically two different things. And wave arrival time and wave height, and a whole lot of other information and data can be added to it as well. So we have this corpus of information sitting available all the time. If we get the alert that there's a tsunami on the way, or any, this is a tsunami scenario, but can be others, get the alert that something is on its way, we can then quickly add the rest of the information and start generating a whole lot of really useful, not perfect, really useful though, options and opportunities and thought prompts and aid memoirs, so that we can quickly synthesize the exact information that we need writ large, plus the information that we need that is event specific, and we can put options in front of our decision makers that are very well considered, and we can do that very quickly. And creating those is almost free and takes minutes.
I'm embracing it because it's like you say, it's a tool used properly. It can do great things for us.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? And you've got to look at it as just a tool. It's certainly no silver bullet. And who knows what the future's like. But for now, if I can use that tool to make better, faster, smarter decisions at scale, I'm gonna do that. And if by training AI only a very small but turn AI towards protecting humanity rather than destroying it, hopefully, who knows if that'll help.
Yeah, maybe enough of us do that. It'll bias the entire thing going, wait a minute, I don't want to destroy the world. We want to help it. All these guys, every emergency manager in the world right now, go out there and start looking in the AI and go, let's train the entire universe on how to be better.
Might be wishful thinking, but I'd rather have the tool and try and use it than I'd hate to be late to the party and think there was a tool out there that I wasn't at least willing to have a good look at.
Right, because in the end, we're here to serve, and help people. So whatever it takes, absolutely.
Yep.
All right. Well, excellent. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much again from the other side of the world on tomorrow. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you around.
Thanks, Randy. It's been a real pleasure. And if you do want to pursue a few of those things we talked about today, maybe we can do that offline, but I'm always happy to help.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Zen and the Art of Emergency Management. Please subscribe to our channel, leave comments, and of course, let me know if you would like to be interviewed. See you next time.